maybe people are familiar enough that like you actually have to dry it before you consume it. You can't just like cut it off the plant and immediately smoke it. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I
So
wouldn't even know that. So that like
I don't know that people. That's things I don't think that people really per se know that. I know that for a very doesn't matter.
Yeah, you just know it.
I just happen to know that.
Yeah.
Well, I love coffee, and I know that you were very familiar with this sort of first style of coffee tourism, which is when you go to different places exploring coffee roasters and different
Independent ones,
coffee
yeah.
shops and things like that. Yes. And when I was like younger and in college and then first out of college for years, most of the travel that I did was basically going to visit friends where you could sort of afford the like, say, plane ticket to, you know, go visit a friend in another city. But then when you were there, you would stay with them. And I always really loved coffee. And I had a very good friend from college who's also named Rebecca, who is also into coffee. And we were really into exploring different coffee scenes in different cities. And then so that really made me start seeking out trying to go to places where they grow coffee, as well as if I was in those parts of the world, to go to coffee farms, to really try to put that into my itinerary.
Welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast with me, James Hammond. Every Monday, I'll be joined by guests to talk about their travel stories, travel tips, backpacking advice, and so much more. Right now, I'm taking the podcast on the road travelling with me. So tune in every week for short-form episodes detailing all my travels alongside my Monday guest episode. Are you a backpacker, gap year student, or simply someone who loves to travel? Then this is the podcast for you, designed to inspire you to travel. There'll be stories to tell, tips to share, and experiences to inspire. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. We're going to chat about two of my favourite things combined today, coffee and travel, and we'll get to that in a second. But an update for the last week. I have been working like a dog on my time, on my business, on my podcast stuff. I've been reaching out on cold emails, pitching emails, to do articles, interviews, trying to get some podcast work. LinkedIn has been heavily influenced by my incessant posts every day. So lots going on, trying to get this side business going. And also lots of interviews. I've had 3 interviews this week, all long format. So really busy to the end of the year for the podcast, really exciting. And we've got the wrap up of the USA road trip coming up next couple of weeks as well. So planning that out. Other than that, just make sure you spread the word about the Winging It Travel podcast. It does actually help the podcast the best, I think, just spreading the word. Hopefully they like the content and the interviews. And also in the show notes of each podcast and the podcast description, if you go onto Apple or Spotify, you'll see some links on there, affiliate links that will help the podcast go forward and keep it independent and sponsor free. And that would help the podcast by if you book something and a little commission comes my way. Finally, I want to say you can join my Substack. If you go to substack.com/travelingbean, you can find my newsletter there. Subscribe, it's free. You'll get my newsletter every Wednesday, I do it weekly. And I've also set up a separate newsletter for my Winging It's book club, because I get sent a lot of books to do for the podcast. So I'm going to review some by word and tell you why you should read it. So yeah, that's the update this week. Let's get stuck into coffee and travel. Cheers. Hello and welcome to this week's episode where I'm joined by Rebecca Shoval. Today we're going to combine 2 of my favourite topics within travel, which is coffee and travel. Rebecca loves coffee tourism, and we're going to talk about how she's visited different coffee roasters around the world, local coffee shops, coffee farms, and how we can maybe help ethical tourism within that space. It's probably a good discussion to have. Also, Rebecca works for an amazing non-for-profit organisation called Not Just Tourists, which is doing amazing work, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Welcome to the show, Rebecca. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Excited to be on. Got my coffee ready.
Apt for the podcast. So where are you right now?
I'm in New York City. That's been my home base for about 15 years. I like to think that I'm an intermittent nomad traveling around, but I always come back to New York City.
And where did you grow up originally?
I grew up in a neighboring state called Pennsylvania in a small Rust Belt town that did not have wonderful coffee, unfortunately. It's improved a little bit, but it's still definitely not, not the place that you would necessarily go to visit for the coffee.
Okay.
Coal museums, maybe.
Yeah, say, what does Rust Belt actually mean?
Oh, so it basically is sort of like it was an industrialized area in the late 19th and early 20th century. And basically the industrialization destroys the agriculture, or, wipes out the agriculture. And then sort of the modern world destroys a lot of the industrial activity. So particularly where I grew up was coal mining. But the expression is used to refer to a lot of like Pennsylvania, Ohio, some parts of the Midwest, where, yeah, there was a lot of industrial activity. They were much more well populated 100 years ago, and they've lost both those jobs and therefore the population along with them.
That makes sense, because the small towns that we saw driving across, there's just nothing going on, hardly anyone there. They're like ghost towns, I said to my partner a little bit.
Yeah, there has been a much more population increase where I grew up in the past few years, actually. Some COVID exodus people in particular, but especially when I grew up, there were tons of just like neighborhoods with so many empty houses. I mean, whole areas, whole parts of town, and not just the town I actually grew up in, but in the the neighboring towns and everything, that were just, there were more houses than there were people, and it was just built for a population almost 3 times the size, really.
So what happens to the people who stay? Like, what do they do for job wise, or if they have any jobs?
It's not great. There are always efforts to bring more jobs to those places, and in different periods of time, there's particularly a lot of warehousing now where I grew up, which is because of, this is very specific information, but because of the coal mines, there were railroad tracks nearby, because the trains would have to come to pick up coal.
Yeah.
And then when they built the highway system in the US, they built some major highways that went basically sort of parallel, or at least along similar paths to the railroads. And so there's some very good, like near where 81 meets 80, and there's a lot of warehousing, and that has been some source of jobs, a lot of kind of secondary offices for bigger companies, not exactly call centers, but things like that, like a lot of administrative work, things that need to be done domestically, but not necessarily at, your central urban offices. And then your just usual medley of, doctors and lawyers and school teachers and firefighters. There's always the jobs that have to exist when there's any population anywhere, but there's never been one great economic driver since probably the 1930s. I mean, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's such a big country. There must be loads of towns like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, there's sort of the iconic ones like Detroit, but there's a lot of smaller ones. That have faced similar fates, and some of them have done better jobs than others of replenishing themselves and figuring out modern ways to move forward, and other ones are pretty empty, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon. I think in Canada you see it less, a little bit, but not as extreme as the US, because obviously the US has got more population. When we drove across, it just felt like this is no one there, or if there is people there, then generally a bit older or kids. There's like no one our age. I'm like, where are the people that are our age?
Yeah, the funny thing is, where I grew up, I think it was a pretty good place to grow up. I think small towns can be like a good environment in some ways to grow up in. And there was a lot of freedom and a lot of nature to play with.
Outside stuff,
But yes, it never felt like a place there was a lot of future to be had. And that feeling, I think, emanates around to people, the feeling of like, if you want to be successful, you have to leave, which isn't actually necessarily true, but that was definitely the zeitgeist.
But like right now, though, technically, if we're going to carry on with hybrid working, or at least remote working, then technically you don't need to leave, as long as you can have a good internet connection and you can work a computer. Then you don't have to leave the small towns going forward. Now, it's quite a new thing, right, because of COVID, but I wonder if people will actually go back because it's maybe cheaper land, buy a bigger house. I don't know. Maybe that's the thing.
Yes, there actually has been quite a bit of population influx in the last few years out of New York and Philadelphia in particular, because of the national housing crisis that the US is facing. Suddenly having too many houses is actually so unusual that people will kind of go anywhere where they can find housing, which is a real change. And certainly not something brought by like a good change, I would say. But yes, that combination of the housing crisis and remote work is very different. And also I just think, whereas it might have been crazy to, commute 2.5 hours to New York or Philadelphia every day a few years ago, to go once or twice a week, maybe, and the rest of the days you work from home, maybe that's not such a bad option if, you get to have a big backyard for your kids to run around it. That certainly seems to be a trade-off some people are making. It's a whole new world. Who knows what it's going to look like?
Because in the US, there's so much driving involved. To get anywhere.
Yes. Yes.
It's soul
but I
destroying
think a lot of people used to commute, half an hour, 45 minutes each way. So I'm not a driving person.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I can imagine that.
City, I try not to. Well, I don't have a car, and I generally try to avoid things that involve too much driving. But it's hard to see much of the U.S., Canada as well. Honestly, most of the Americas without driving. So. Yeah,
you need a car, big time. It's not like Europe, when you jump on a train, go to each city. It's not built for that.
And in my experience, when you do coffee tourism, there's some driving involved. Either you're being driven, or you got to drive yourself to those coffee plantations, because they are obviously not in the center of town, and inherently being farms there.
So for growing up in Pennsylvania, was there much travel for you, which maybe got you interested in travel in general?
We did some travel, I think, more than a lot of people, mostly vacations to go see family members who lived in other places. I was thinking about this in preparation for our conversation, and I was thinking that so many of my memories of traveling when I was a kid are really food memories. Okay. I can think of one summer for my parents' work. We spent it in Maine, and I have like some very lovely memories of like being at the beach and stuff, because we were pretty close to the water where we were staying. Yeah. And that's very different than where I grew up, which is more in the mountains. But also one of my memories, a lot of those memories really are actually just about the food and eating the fresh seafood and stuff, which also was not super available in the early 90s in Pennsylvania. I mean, there's always, obviously there's restaurants that serve it, but not in the same way where you're like, oh, look, there's people bringing food off, shellfish off boats and things like that. That was, my first exposure to that sort of a thing. And it really stands out in my memory.
That's a good point, actually, because I remember like being in the middle, like somewhere like, I don't know, Wyoming or South Dakota. I'm like, you're so far from the water here. Like you are miles away. So like the fresh, like you say, fresh food from the sea, not possible in the slightest. No. And even just getting anywhere.
There is like river fish in a lot of those places, and lake fish. But not crab or lobster or mussels, things like that.
Yeah, I did get a lobster roll in New England. That was pretty good. But yeah, the food up there is sensational if you like fish. If you don't like it, then it doesn't make a difference, does it?
Probably not. Unless you're really into like baked beans or certain kinds of pie.
Baked beans are the best. Oh no, hang on a minute. Baked beans in USA. Okay, as you mentioned it, I've gone a little bit of a tangent. You can't find normal baked beans in USA.
What are English baked beans? How are they different than American ones? American ones have probably way more sugar in them.
Yeah, so English baked beans are just baked beans and tomato sauce. At USA, it's always with pork, brown sugar, bacon is a classic one. I just couldn't find anything without meat or without added sugar. It got me down, must admit.
Yes, I think they do usually have pork. I mean, you can often find like ones, they're promoting themselves as being vegetarian, I guess, that don't have meat in them. But then they would be beans. Yes, it would be like, this is vegetarian baked beans. And it would still probably have sugar or maple syrup in it.
Yeah.
And maple syrup is another like great food from New England and Eastern Canada that's very hard to get elsewhere, but like really adds interesting flavors, I think. We could do a different podcast on maple syrup.
Yeah, I don't like maple syrup that much. Sorry, Canadians. But yeah, I couldn't find.
I might kick you out of Canada now. I don't know.
No, I'm resident now. That's too late. I can say what I want.
I don't know about maple syrup though. That's like their iconic. I mean, the maple flag.
I tell you the worst story about maple syrup I had. We went 10 hours like driving up north, and we got recommended to a little stop called the Sugar Shack. It's on this road. They do amazing food. and they do coffee. Coffee was good, actually, decent coffee. At that time, I was having sugar in my coffee, so I went, "Oh, can I have some sugar?" "Oh no, we don't have sugar." I was like, "Oh, well, what do I want? What can I have that's sweet in my coffee?" "Well, we only have maple syrup." I'm like, "Oh, for God's sake, why do you have maple syrup? You should have sugar on the side." So I have to have maple syrup in my coffee, and I was grim. Ruined the coffee.
Yeah, I would not put maple syrup in my coffee. That feels
Too
like it's
much.
a waste of both the coffee and the maple syrup,
Yeah,
honestly.
both not complementing each other there. They both should be kept separate and do their own thing.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
do really like maple syrup, but not standing up to something like coffee.
yeah. Canada needs to sort itself out with that. But okay. And the next question so traveling about in USA, seeing some states. What about international travel? When did that first come into your life?
When I was in high school, I did a summer program in England. And that was,
Oh,
I think, probably the first time I was really had been outside of the US for,
yeah,
um, any period of time, at least that, yeah. And, not that it's the most different choice, if you will. But that was definitely an experience. And it was one kind of thing where there's people come from all over the world to do it. So that was, there was a lot of exposure internationally.
where was that in England?
It was at Cambridge.
Oh, close to where I'm from. Yeah. I'm from Norwich, so it's down the road.
And then I would say, I was lucky enough to do a little bit in college as well, but really it didn't come until the mid 2010s, I guess I would say, was when I was really able to kind of start traveling more internationally, make more decisions for myself about, what my schedule was going to be like, and whatnot. So a lot of my travel before that was domestically, and I still do like to travel within the US and Canada as well. Having lived my entire life basically in the northern part of the US, Canada is very close by. It's closer than much of the US, especially
Yeah,
like Montreal and Toronto. So yeah, there's, it's friendly neighbor to the north, doesn't feel so international, I guess.
yeah, I get that. Someone told me the borders were open before 9/11. You could just go across without,
Yeah,
needing
you
a
just needed a
passport.
driver's
Yeah.
license. It was very
Mm.
easy, and I think people used to. I mean, there's a lot of things that were built, I think, really on the premise that would be just kind of an open border, particularly
Yeah.
around like things around Niagara Falls and Buffalo, like really upstate New York and
Yeah.
that area, and even I think also in Michigan, where there's like a point where Canada is like there's a part of the US that goes north of where the part of Canada
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And I do think, a lot of that stuff that was built in those as those areas developed just did anticipate that people would have a pretty easy time going back and forth, not be stuck at the border for 2 hours or however long if you go by land, intermittently. So
Yeah, we learnt
yeah.
that in Roosevelt Park, which is in New England. So Campobello Island. It's a little island that connects New Brunswick in Canada to Maine, and it's the only park in the world, I believe, that's internationally owned. So Canada and US own it both, but it's in Canada, technically over the border. And it's Campobello Park. I think Roosevelt in the war used to go there for summer holidays and stuff like that. I'm like, oh yeah. If you look at the map, you do realize that Maine is so far up. Because
Yes.
you go up Quebec and around the top of Maine to go New Brunswick. I'm like, well, that's no difference to being like in New Brunswick, right? It's the same topography, it's the same thing, really. Just the border goes across. But yeah, then you realize, oh yeah, a lot of Canada is actually below USA. It's quite a weird dynamic.
Yeah, it is. Borders are always such an odd thing. But I remember being years ago, in one of the Great Lakes, north of Cleveland, and we were on like an island inside one of the lakes, and my cell phone, we had come from Ohio, I hadn't really thought about it, and the cell phone kept trying to get you to join like Canadian signal.
Oh, yes,
Which
yes.
I mean actually is not that big of a deal because like today it would be not such a big deal. Actually, my cell phone plan like on Verizon just includes Canada and Mexico, but it was long enough ago, not so, but 8 years or something ago, maybe 10, that would have, been charging you $20 a day or something. And you're like, I don't know how to make this stop. Like
Yeah.
we're in the
We've had
US,
that
like I
problem.
didn't
Yeah.
actually leave, but I see how this island might be like closer to the mainland of Canada than the mainland of the US.
Yeah, that is strange. Yeah, we had that problem going in, actually. Had to turn it off. And we have that problem here on the island of Vancouver Island, as close to Seattle. So, yeah, strange stuff.
Yeah, that's very close.
There's a weird quirk where we are. I don't know if you know Western Canada much, but there's a bit of the mainland of Canada, and half of it is actually in US. It's called Point Roberts. If people look on the map right now, Point Roberts is a border, straight border, and the bottom half of this little like peninsula is US. It's like 10 kilometers, 10 miles long, nothing. But there's no schools or services in Point Roberts in the US part, so all the US kids, populations and stuff have to pop over the border to school every day. It's just a weird quirk where the border is. So they're like, they can't go anywhere else because the sea is surrounding them, and then north is Canada. So they have like this weird, like quirky relationship
how that
where
happened.
Yeah, like why is that?
I didn't know about that. I know. Like I have a friend from college who grew up in Bellingham, which is basically so far north in Washington, you're almost in Canada. But yeah, it's like you actually had to go to so they would go all the time across the border like that. Vancouver was the closest city, but he didn't like go to school in Canada or anything.
Right.
It was like from how in New York
10
you
minutes,
just go to New Jersey all the time or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah, you don't think about it. Yeah.
But all the Canadians, they drive down to Point Roberts and go over the border to get petrol or gas because it's so much cheaper.
I don't know what I thought you were going to say, but I think there's a number of things that are sometimes cheaper in the US, but then there's a lot of things that are cheaper in Canada. So,
is there?
Gasoline.
I haven't found anything yet.
Well, okay. You have to take into account the exchange rate.
Oh, maybe the coffee is more expensive in US, actually. Yeah. I reckon you pay $3 for an Americano, for example, but you pay $3 for an Americano, so that is cheaper here in theory. Yeah, but Canada's expensive, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I mean, the US and Canada they're just expensive countries. I mean,
apart from the gas was the saving grace in the US. It was east where you are, but going west.
It is. Yes, it is probably too inexpensive. No one come for me for saying that.
It should be more expensive. Yeah, before we get to coffee, which is going to be a great conversation, you have been abroad this year to Southeast Asia.
Yes,
Where did you go?
I was in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and briefly in Laos. I did sort of a long weekend in Laos.
Oh yeah.
Which was very interesting. But mostly I was in Thailand and Malaysia. Those are the places I spent the most length of time.
Was that your first time there?
I had been to Thailand before, on a much shorter trip for like pre-pandemic. I don't remember exactly how long we went, but maybe about 10 days, and I really liked it. It was honestly not somewhere that I was super looking to travel to. It's such a popular, that seems very silly, but it's such a popular travel destination that I thought, I don't really usually want to go to super popular tourist destinations. But I had friends who were nomads who were spending like 6 months in Thailand.
Dream.
And yeah. And this is like, again, 5 years ago. So this was much more exotic at the time of an idea. And the sort of schedule of when I could go meet them when they were traveling, because in general they were gone for like 2 years, lined up with them being in Thailand. And it's a pretty easy place to get to from almost anywhere because it's such a popular tourist destination. And so I went, and we were in Bangkok a bit and in one of the islands, and I was just like, oh my God, what have I been thinking? Bangkok is such an interesting place. I don't know why why everyone isn't talking about it.
Yeah.
The islands were beautiful. Thai food is obviously amazing, which I did know that Thai food was very good, but it's it's one of the few cuisines I feel like I can eat all the time and not think like, I don't want this anymore. Sometimes you get home from somewhere, you're like, I don't want to eat that food for
not Thai food
the next 3 months. But like Thai food, the ones I don't feel about, like Thai food, Mexican food, Korean food. I love Korean food. So yeah, I really wanted to, in particular, I was very lucky to be able to work remotely, and the time zone is terrible to the east coast of the US. It is that was actually much harder than I anticipated, because I have done like remote work travel before, but never in such a dramatically different time zone, so I was having all my meetings between like 9 p.m. and midnight, Southeast Asia time, which is 9 a.m. to noon in New York.
Yeah.
It was all, it was all a learning experience. But it really, I'm just so grateful, because without that, I wouldn't have been able to spend like several months straight in Asia. And, you get to have such different experiences when you're somewhere for a long time, and, really stay in an apartment and get to, just sort of have your daily life in different places. So
that's the dream scenario going forward, isn't it? If you can work remotely, whether that's for yourself or just for a company that allows it, gives you so many options. I just need to go back to Thailand. I've been there like twice or 3 times. I just haven't been for years, but I always just pine to go back. And I don't know. Oh yeah, it's a great country. I love it. I've seen a lot of it though, but I just always want to go back. I think food is part of it, but also just that, you can chill out on an island. There's so many islands to choose from. You've got the obvious ones, but there's loads of other ones that people don't talk about, like Koh Lipe, for example, and stuff like that. You think, just want to go there and just sit there on the beach and just have proper water, warm water, proper food.
Yes.
Dream.
And it's gorgeous, and people are friendly, and it's always interesting things going on. I was telling somebody recently, I cannot imagine how this came up in conversation, but it was basically about this. One day we were on mopeds, and we were on like an island, kind of like, but particularly on the like further, more rural side of the island. And there's just kind of like, for restaurants, they're basically the back of someone's home on the side of the road. And, that's true in a lot of the world, right? Like when you stop at a restaurant somewhere, the restaurant is like heavily in quotes, and you're basically paying like a very nice woman or maybe not a nice woman, but, at least a sort of welcoming person of some kind, since they're like advertising that you can, come in, and they have like the back room of their house set up as a restaurant, and they're making, they're making food, and it's both as a result of the way that they live, and just as a result of a lack of infrastructure, very fresh items. And
dreamy.
I hope someone's going to be upset by what I'm about to say, but we ordered something like that. We ordered some chicken things off the menu. And at, one point, my friend Tim was like, "Oh my God, she's killing the chicken." We pulled in, basically, you can see there were a few chickens in the yard, and that's not unusual in Asia to see like chickens running around. And it's almost like it's kind of a joke here sometimes when your food takes a really long time, where people will be like, "What are they doing? Milking the cow?" Or got it, catching the fish. And it was like, she's literally killing the chicken, because she can't, if nobody comes in that day, then she's not gonna,
that's a waste,
preemptively do it and waste the chicken. So it was delicious. Thank you. Again, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
How did you
had a good life,
How did you find like the islands, like in general? Like, did you like was it busy, or was it less busy than you thought? Like, what was your impressions? And where did you go in the islands? What islands did you go to?
When I was earlier this year, I was in one called Koh Phangan. And previously I had been in one called Koh Lanta. Which is like, they're actually on the opposite side. But that had to do with the time of year that we were there, which, if you are going to Thailand, look up the weather and where it makes sense to go based on the time of year, because the answer actually changes very dramatically. And you will be inevitably, like, weather matters a lot in places where indoors is a very relative expression compared to like how the cold weather places in particular, like in the US and Canada, are built. But I would say that I did this time, in 2023, find it to be very busy. But we were on the island. It was relatively busy the whole time. I mean, but but it was like pretty manageable. And then there was a festival the like last weekend that we were there, and that was crazy. There were way too many people everywhere, and you just met people who were like, we paid X amount of dollars to like stay in a hotel. And I was like, I'm sorry, that's what I paid to be here for like a month. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, and and just I think, and don't get me wrong, like Thai people are very welcoming, and I think in general, like they're not out to make every last dollar. But the attitude that we encountered, like during the period of time of this festival, of the Full Moon Festival, was just so different than the rest of the time or anything else I experienced in Thailand. Of just like I mean, I don't know that they're literally the same people, but the attitude of everyone was just totally different and much more brusque and much more like how much I want to get every like last cent out of this situation. And then how do I don't the sort of environmental damage you see, just from this like 1 to 3 day events are overwhelming.
I think the performing party is so popular that they just switch on like money making mode for that like week, because it's like a week or weekend. And I think they realize that for the rest of the month there's probably a slow amount of tourists that go there because people just go Copenhagen for full moon party. But the sight after full moon party on the beaches, like all the crap everywhere and stuff, is awful, really. And it goes into the sea as well. And I think maybe they don't like it, the general locals on the island, because they see it, okay, we can make money, but the attitudes and the trash, maybe they're not a fan of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the person, but I do think it's definitely something that's like happening to them and not something that they're, yes. I don't begrudge them like behaving. I mean, I'm sure the tourists were worse behaved, believe me.
Yeah.
One of the funny things that has very recently happened in Thailand is that marijuana was legalized in 2022, but Thai people don't really consume marijuana. It's like for tourists, basically. And there's no rules in place. They didn't create any sort of legal system, regulatory system around it, like in Canada, for example, or what's supposed to exist in New York State, which is all a little chaotic as well. But it's just like basically a free for all, as like the way that, I don't know, say clothing is unregulated as an item. And so there was and it's pretty new. So there was just a ton of marijuana stores, especially in the touristy areas, but also in the sort of expat or wealthier areas of Bangkok as well. And when we were in the islands, you would see people growing like small marijuana plants outside, to sell like small amounts at hotels and things like that. And then also like basically plant stores that were growing marijuana, and the climate is relatively friendly to it there, being so hot. It's actually really a desert plant, but I guess it can handle some, the rain somewhat if it's that hot and sunny all the time. And so there would just be like tons of marijuana plants outside these stores. And here that would like get you robbed. I mean, people put like massive protection and like around that in the United States and Canada. And it was just like, I think they thought, well, I guess A, no one's taking it. And B, if they do, well, we'll just like have another plant. It's just a plant. Which was just like fascinating to see, especially after all of the like infrastructure and rule creation and again security that goes into those exact same operations, or the same at least result operations in the US and Canada. So something to look forward to / not forward to, depending on how you look at it. If you're going to Thailand, it's very strong, like, very strong weed. So be careful.
Well, I guess they've got this weird scenario where if they don't actually consume it, then the locals aren't going to nick it because they probably don't care. Like, oh, we don't need it. I guess then it might turn into a bit of a business in the future where like, oh, he's selling more than I do. In the future, it might ramp up a little bit. But yeah, I guess if only tourists want it, I don't think would tourists nick it. Maybe some tourists would, but most tourists just buy it to consume, not to nick the plant, because they've got to go home.
Yes, and I do, and maybe people are familiar enough that like you actually have to dry it before you consume it. You can't just like cut it off the plant and immediately smoke it. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know that. So that like
I don't know that people. That's things I don't think that people really per se know that. I know that for a very doesn't matter. I guess.
Yeah, you just know it.
I just happen to know that.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean, it's still, but it is sort of like, what if it did feel very like, what if marijuana was a tomato plant, or an apple tree like that, where they're just, it's not like you worry. People like have apple trees in their yards and you don't worry, what if somebody steals one of my apples? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't think any, if you need it that badly, take the apple, I think would be most people's attitude, or, whatever, like you either have no apples or tons of them. So yeah, that kind of a thing.
Okay.
Anyway,
let's go to coffee.
Mm-hmm.
So you reached out with a little email proposal about talking about coffee and tourism, which is great. So first of all, what made you want to talk about coffee? Like, what was the thinking behind it? Is there like a trip you've done, or you visit some coffee farms? Like, what's the thinking behind that?
Well, I love coffee, and I know that you were very familiar with this sort of first style of coffee tourism, which is when you go to different places exploring coffee roasters and different
independent ones,
coffee shops and things like that. Yes. And that was something particularly when you were sort of asking about my travel, like trajectory. And when I was like younger and in college and then first out of college for years, most of the travel that I did was basically going to visit friends, where you could sort of afford the, like, say, plane ticket to, go visit a friend in another city. But then when you were there, you would stay with them. You wouldn't necessarily go out and do extravagant things. And I always really loved coffee. And I had a very good friend from college who's also named Rebecca, who is also into coffee. And we were really into exploring different coffee scenes in different cities. And she lived for a while in San Francisco, and that has like long had a pretty good coffee scene. And, it's also a really great, like a really expensive cup of coffee is like $5, right? I mean, most coffee, like as a relative item, it's much less than, right? That would be like a crazy cheap glass of wine, or like a moderate to inexpensive price beer, depending on where you are. And so, it's like to be like, oh, let's go with your friends to coffee shops is like a pretty inexpensive way to explore as well. I wouldn't say like that was like the first thought that we had, but it made it very easy to go do that, right? To like check out different coffee shops, because if someone doesn't want a coffee, you don't have to have a coffee, right? If someone, it's not the kind of thing where you're like all compelled into it. And I just got like, I think the more coffee you have, maybe this isn't true for everyone, it's hard to say, but I like the more coffee you have, the more interesting I think it becomes, the more you're able to spot nuances between them, to really learn about how all of the different processes, all of the different elements of the coffee process, from growth, where in the world it's grown, the type of bean it is, the drying process, the storing process, the roasting process, they all go into the result and impact so many of the different things that you experience as a coffee consumer. And I just got really fascinated with that, and with seeing that and tasting it, I guess, more than seeing it. And then the New York City that I moved to in 2009, did not have a great coffee scene. There was good coffee. There definitely was, but it was very much something you had to seek out. You would, research and then go actively, like go find places that had good coffee. Or, obviously people were already writing blogs probably at that time about it. And, so that was something that I did. And then over the years, New York has like gotten a lot more, particularly coffee roasters, as the city has figured out sort of ways to roast coffee within the city, which basically has to be done in like semi-industrial areas.
Yeah.
With the localized pollution rules. And there's just many, many more good coffee shops and places that carry high-end coffee, specialty coffee. And so now I do think that pretty much in any neighborhood, there's really somewhere that you would want to drink coffee. But there's definitely still, some outstanding ones, and it doesn't make it any less interesting to me than when I do go other places to seek it out.
This is a Patreon shout out to Laura from the Swamp Soup Stickers, who has contributed £5 to the podcast on my Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. Really appreciate it, and it helps the podcast to keep going in the future. If you're interested, head to the show notes where you'll find a link to my Patreon. The website address is patreon.com/Winging It Travel Podcast. For £5 you will receive some trendy stickers from myself in the post, a shout out on each episode, and also my digital travel planner by email. Thank you for your support. The first question I have then for New York City, because let's say someone listening right now, if they're going to visit New York, they're probably going to go to Manhattan, like I did this year. So in Manhattan, could you name 2 or 3 places that are great for coffee?
Are you just worried that people will only give you recommendations in Brooklyn? Is that what keeps happening to you?
Oh, if there's something in Brooklyn as well, yeah, fire away. I'm just thinking like, well...
No, New York is large, absolutely.
Yeah.
Something I'm a big fan of, a place that's a New York coffee roaster. They roast in Brooklyn, and then they have, I think now they're up to 6 or 8 locations, called Variety Coffee. And they've expanded a bit more recently, but again, that's still in like a very small scale, and they roast locally. And they have their own, obviously they do their own beans and everything, and so they have some different varieties. That's one that I really like to go to. Another one that roasts just slightly upstate but has locations in the city is called Irving Farm.
Okay.
And they roast in a town called Irvington, but the other than there, and I mean, I think they have it a little bit in that sort of area, the Hudson Valley, which is very tied in with the city culturally, and they have some locations in Manhattan as well. And I very much enjoy their product. I think that also, like, one of the fun things to do though can be to go to, well, to try a lot of different ones, but to go to coffee cuppings, where you go and you really try at the roaster or at the
like little ones.
Call that. Yes.
Like a coffee tasting. Yeah, like beer tasting. Like you try little ones, don't you?
Yes, like the flight of beer, but it's like the mini, the mini coffee varieties from a different place, depending on what you like. And I think that there's even kind of more new coffee things opening. I think that's very much something that's still happening. We're still in the sort of swell up. That being said, if you are in New York, there are places that will actively try to trick you into thinking they are like small batch roasters. I don't want to like shame anyone right now, like any places, so I'm not going to name drop them. I think anyone who lives in New York will like know particularly 2 new places that have just opened a ton of locations. And if you look at individual ones, they appear to be like small coffee shops, but they are not, and they like do not do a good job with their coffee. There's a lot. I mean, for all of the good coffee, there's still a ton of terrible coffee.
Ton of shit coffee.
There is so much bad coffee, like in bodegas, which in general I'm a big fan of, but like they usually have terrible coffee. And in a lot of like chain places, in a lot of diners or casual restaurants. Years ago, and it doesn't matter, but it's definitely, I would say, almost any neighborhood you're staying in or working in or visiting for whatever reason, there's going to be some good coffee shop that you can scope out.
And it's worth getting on record how shit Starbucks coffee is.
I am not a fan. I wouldn't even.
Not a fan. I'm anti it.
I don't like it. What? I mean, I'm just, I don't need to. No, I just.
But I love the chocolate brownies.
With somebody about it recently because they were like, "But the Starbucks is closer," and I was like, "I'm not.
Don't care.
If we go there, I'm not going to get coffee. So we're still going somewhere else to get coffee after that."
Like over here, it's like, oh, what is worse? Is it Tim Hortons or Starbucks coffee? Oh. Well,
whereas here it's like basically, especially on the East Coast, Dunkin' Donuts versus Starbucks. And to be honest, if those are my 2 options, I personally would choose Dunkin' Donuts. It rarely comes up but like maybe at an airport or at
or somewhere
remote,
like
driving somewhere, and exactly, like at a rest stop kind of thing, where those are the things. And every once in a while you do see Tim Hortons also in New York. There's a bit of that, but not many of them.
So someone said to me in Canada about Tim Hortons, right? So Tim Hortons used to have good coffee, apparently. I'm going to take that with a pinch of salt. But then their coffee got sold to McDonald's. And now I don't mind McDonald's coffee. I've got to put that on record. I don't love it, but I don't mind it. But now Tim Hortons coffee is just shit, right? It's just crap coffee like Starbucks. But people are saying it used to be good, but now that coffee went to McDonald's, and then McDonald's have their coffee. In Canada, this is not maybe US.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because I if I have to get a coffee and there's like 3 or 4 chains in a little town, I'm going to McDonald's and get a coffee because it's not too bad. But that's what
I mean,
someone
I
said
do
to me.
think you can do worse definitely than McDonald's coffee, but
Yeah.
that's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. I almost wonder though if that person just got used to better coffee over time and realized that it wasn't so great, because like
Yeah.
I
I
remember
don't
in
know.
particular, like my parents drank coffee when I was growing up. I mean, they drank
Mm,
Folgers, which is
don't know that.
that was like canned
Oh,
pre-ground coffee. It's not instant, but it was like it was sort of one of the largest brands in the US for a long
okay.
time. And then they started drinking like, in the 90s, as a lot of these things started to change, maybe like some 8 o'clock bean and other kind of like slightly nicer coffees, but
Mm.
nothing compared to like what you would drink today. And I like, taking my dad to some like in the like late aughts to some nicer coffee shops, and like kind of always being like, oh, well, why don't we just go to this place instead of Starbucks, or instead of whatever other bad coffee. And at one point he's like, I can't drink the other coffee anymore. I used to think it was fine, and now I realize you've showed me all this good coffee. I don't want to drink the other stuff anymore.
That's a fair point. The annoying thing about USA, a coffee drinking perspective, is you get paper cups. I'm like, oh, just give me a normal cup. The amount of times we went to and this could be an independent cafe as well, and we're sitting in, they still give you a takeaway cup, and I'm like, nah, I don't like this. It's just a waste of paper and wood, right? I'd rather have a
Yeah,
normal
no,
cup that they wash up.
I absolutely agree. And as somebody who mostly drinks iced coffee, even places that often have mugs won't necessarily have any sort of like to stay cold cups, which I
Yes,
find
true.
very
That's
odd
true.
because
Yeah, yeah.
cold coffee is extremely popular
Popular,
here.
yeah. Yeah.
And I would imagine at least half the people coming in. I mean, I haven't done a scientific study, but my casual observation is that at least half, if not more than half, people are drinking a cold coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Um,
right. Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of reusable cups. I like to,
Hmm.
as much as possible, carry them around. I'm a big, particularly often mason jars is what I'll carry around because I like how you
Yeah.
can like properly seal it, and I'll like carry coffee with me places. And then sometimes people are like, are you like think that you're drinking something funny out of there in a way that no one like seems to ask you if you're just like have a what's obviously a coffee cup. Even if you put other things in it, they don't ask you. But
Yeah.
sometimes with a mason jar, people are like, why? What do you got there? And it's like, it's 10 in the morning. What do you think I have
Yeah.
here?
Yeah. Yeah. That's what we start to do. We start to carry our coffee cups around. Yeah, nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Internationally, before we get stuck into like the coffee process, the
Mm-hmm.
farms and stuff, were there some cities or countries that just had great coffee for you that you love drinking?
Well, I mean, I think that it's something that you can find if you really seek it out in a lot of places, definitely not everywhere.
Mm.
Malaysia has some excellent coffee,
Yeah.
particularly in Georgetown and Penang in the
Georgetown.
north.
Yeah.
But also in Kuala Lumpur, I did have some great coffee as well. I
Hmm.
think that as a place that's so interested in food, in my experience, Malaysia was probably one of the most like food focused countries I've ever been to.
Hmm.
Really love their food, which I appreciate. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great. Go visit Malaysia, everyone.
Yeah.
um and but yeah, and so I think that on some level it's just like people have a lot of appreciation for flavors and for what you put, there's no non-weird way to say this, what you put in your mouth. Also want good coffee, and so that was like a really pleasant somewhat surprise to me. I Seoul, South Korea, also a great
Oh, the
coffee
best place this year
culture.
we went to for coffee. So
Yeah, you
unreal.
would. I know. I mean, I think it's another place where people are very into food. I'm not sure what it is exactly, what
Yeah.
begets it. But yeah, and I mean, I think those are some places I've really had great coffee, and then where just sort of during general international travel. I mean, I think there's a lot of US and Canadian cities as well that
Mm.
have some great small coffee shops. I was in Toronto earlier this year. And yeah, definitely had some good coffee experiences in the scenarios where I got to like really choose where the coffee
Yeah.
was being consumed, because definitely not everywhere. I do, when I travel internationally, travel with a coffee pitcher, and domestically, pretty much if I'm going to be gone for longer than like 24 hours,
Yeah.
I will travel with my Japanese cold brew pitcher.
Okay.
And depending on where I'm going and if I know how good the beans will be or not, with the coffee scene is there, travel with beans as well, to put in there. But yeah, that doesn't stop me from trying coffee in as many different places as I can. And I think, there's always different experiences to be had, and people consume coffee in different ways in different countries, and you can have interesting experiences with that, even if it's not the most exactly what you might want to drink all the time yourself. True. So, yes.
Yeah, I think this year on our travels, like the most surprising country which had like an overall good coffee scene was Oman. That was like top surprising one. Seoul was the best city, which had a plethora of options for coffee, like independent shops, proper cups, independent roasters, roasted on site coffee, like just so many options in Seoul. And I also thought, I love espressos. So I thought it's classic, but Italy is just a great place for espresso. We went to one place in Venice where they have like 100 espressos on the wall to try. They're all different types of flavors. They're all like €1. So I had like I had one of their filter coffees because they have like hundreds of filter coffees as well, and had an espresso. It's just like I could be all week in here just trying different ones. But they close at 1 p.m. I like that because you get in free coffee, and we don't serve coffee after 1 p.m. It's now wine and pasta. Like, okay, I get it.
It's always, some of those things are always so like there's a lot of
rules.
Yes, well, it's always funny, like a lot of times when you come back to the United States, like the things that you're like happy about, and this again, it's similar, like are often like the most kind of like some silly things, like ice. It's really exciting to like be able to have all the ice you want. If you notice, like Americans, Canadians, we love to drink ice, or like have ice in our drinks, not just coffee, but like water, soda, everything. And I remember like, yes, I can think of being in Italy and Spain as well, where it's like, no, you can't have that now, and it's like, I don't want to be an asshole, but like you have the espresso machine, like really, like I can't have it.
Yeah.
Like, but I try never to like upset people too much, especially well, let me rephrase it. When I travel internationally, I try to be like as accommodating, or it's like sort of considerate of the other culture, and so whereas here I maybe would be like, come on, just give me the coffee. Because no American is like, oh, it's inappropriate to drink coffee at this hour. That doesn't like fit with our cultural perception of coffee.
Like here, people go to get coffee at 7 p.m, which is, if you say that to Italian, they'd be like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
exactly. And they've I think a lot of places ideas about like, this is when meals as well, right? This is when you eat these foods, or this is when you like, you
no right or wrong
during not these towns. No, you can't eat during not times, and it's like, which I think if I like were really living in one of those places would be fine. You just like is a big change from kind of all day restaurants, or like eating when it makes sense in your schedule here. So it's not to say it's good or bad, just a adjustment. Yes, I would like to try that place that you just said at Venice. So I have been to Italy, but not to Venice. So
there's two famous ones in Venice. There's the Cafe Florian, which is the oldest coffee shop in the world, but you are paying $20 ish for coffee. Not making that up.
That's a lot of money in Italy, especially.
I done an episode on that, and I was shocked at the price. But it's about 12-13 euros for Americano. But if you go further back outside of the tourist areas, there's a roaster called Cannareggio Vazione, I think it's called, where they do a roasting on site, and they provide it out to Venice as a city, but their roastery is at the back, and it's like €1 a coffee, so it's like proper prices, and locals go there as well. So if people want to see that episode, they can check into my Trendy Coffee YouTube channel where I showcase that coffee roaster.
Well, that does sound wonderful also, because I do feel like Italy is a country where a lot of the coffee is roasted by one or two major coffee brands.
Lavazza, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, which I do like. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, you're right.
I don't know. It's something wrong that it's just it doesn't have the frequent variety that I...
Yeah. And there's always dark roast, I find, mostly. Maybe medium to dark roast at best, but no light roast. It's sort of go out.
Yes, I mean, really roasting dark roast, which is also so much of what you find at Starbucks, at Pete's, at really almost any basically, sort of large scale American chain as well.
Mm.
It allows for consistency. And if you're trying to
Yep.
produce the same thing over and over again,
Yep.
I can see how there's value in that, right? There's
Yep.
predictability and people want to know
Trust
what
it.
they're getting. Some
Yeah.
people want to know what they're getting. And it definitely eliminates, I mean, I'm just saying I would rather the variety, but I can see how,
Same.
some people clearly prefer the consistency. And, it does take some of the guesswork out of, if you're going to have thousands of locations, the detail work of, everyone
Mm.
along the way. Particularly I think dark roast like allows you to have more room for error when you're making it.
Yeah, that's true.
It,
very geeky coffee talk, but yeah, you're right. If you've got like a dark roast, it's easier off the bat. But if you find that like light roast that you love, you better make sure you write that down, because you need to make sure the temperature is right again.
Exactly, and it might not even be the next bag of it.
Yeah,
might not be the same.
Yeah. It's
I
an art
was
form. Yeah.
in upstate New York this weekend where I went to college. So Ithaca, New York, which is a lovely town in the Finger Lakes. If anyone's looking for summer or fall, do not go in winter. Vacation places to go to. It's a wine region, and there's a lot of great local agriculture. But there is the first really good coffee I ever had. My hallelujah, angels singing coffee moment. This is why people drink coffee. This is what it's supposed to be. A roaster called Gimme Coffee, which already in the early aughts was just at the time was pretty groundbreaking, I would say, with the direct coffee relationships and the quality that they were producing, which now is much more common, but it's 20 years later, and they were they were doing it then. And I was at their coffee shop, one of their coffee shops this past weekend. It's still a very small roaster. They have a few locations in Ithaca and one in the neighboring town of Trumansburg. And my boyfriend was drinking a decaf Americano, and he was like, this is almost too good. The coffee is too smooth. It's too pleasant. Coffee is supposed to be a little unpleasant when you drink it.
But decaf coffee, this is a bit of a geeky fact, that's a different bean, isn't it? So decaf coffee beans are grown obviously differently to normal coffee beans because they don't have the caffeine in it. So the growing process is slightly different for those guys.
There are different varieties too, where sometimes there's a chemical process that is used to remove caffeine.
Oh, really? Okay.
As well from some.
So what, it can be a normal.
I don't know exactly how that
works.
Like
a normal coffee bean, and then they can extract the caffeine from that.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah, to make it. I should probably have. I don't normally talk about decaf. That was even a random aside that he happened to have had some.
Yeah,
but they don't do enough decaf coffee to have decaf coffee in sort of on hand. So you can, if you want decaf, you can only have the espresso or Americano, things like that. I don't, to be honest, decaf is a little outside of my expertise because I don't really consume it at all.
Yeah,
that's funny now I think about it.
Yeah.
I think the last time I talked about coffee, I don't even think the word decaf came up. So
it shouldn't come up, no. But
yeah, I'm not I've drank plenty of caffeinated coffee. I don't need to add decaf to my life.
Yeah, I've got this little coffee Bible book which tells you the history of coffee, which Café Florian is mentioned in Venice because it's where Casanova went and all those people back in the day, and it was the only coffee shop in the world that allowed women in their early doors. But yeah, they're saying the decaf coffee process is slightly different for some. I guess for some, maybe technology these days they can just literally get a coffee bean, extract it out, and it's done. But yes, decaf should, in my opinion, should not be talked about. But, there we go. One of the most surprising places that I found a coffee espresso machine this year was up Langtang Valley. In Nepal, you can hike up 3 days, get to Langtang Valley. It's about 3,000 meters above sea level. And someone told me, oh yeah, someone's doing espresso coffee. It's like, get out of here. You don't get espresso coffee in the mountains. And no, you just go to Himalayan bakery. So I went there, and lo and behold, there's a guy there, quite young guy, serving espresso coffee. And bearing in mind, anything there, whether it's building materials, whether it's a coffee espresso machine, is carried up by someone. Someone had to lug that up up the path to Langtang Valley, and it's called Himalayan Bakery, I think it's called. Yeah, and really nice guy, but he's doing like espresso coffees, iced coffees, the whole lot.
At that, which is, I mean, I haven't been to Nepal, but I mean, I can imagine how remarkable it is. I wonder if it's affected by the altitude.
Thing about coffee is deeply sure. When it says like Nepalese coffee, it is in terms of like packages, it's packaged, isn't it? But the coffee bean will be like from somewhere else. But I think, yeah, I don't actually know at that level when you're storing just coffee beans, whether the altitude and the temperature would affect it. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's interesting too. I was more thinking just like literally because espresso is a pressurized machine.
Yeah.
If
yeah,
that, right? Well. Like, I don't know if
it tastes bloody good.
Okay, well, that's good. You know, it doesn't,
Yeah.
You don't have to be very high for it to impact like the boiling point of water, for example,
all that sort of
right?
stuff.
Like,
yeah.
So I wonder, I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time at like extreme altitude, but I've spent time at what I guess you might call moderate altitude.
Yeah.
Like in Colombia, and it's like always, it impacts a wide range of things.
Yeah,
so I
you're
would wonder.
Right about that. Yeah, but there's another. So that's Langtang Valley village, and then further up, another 300 meters, so about 1,000 feet. There's another coffee shop. There's two actually up there who do espresso coffee, and that's even higher up. But yeah, the guy was just saying that he found a gap that Westerners who are doing these hikes, they don't really like instant coffee. It's a bit shit. Like, so if we do an espresso coffee in a cafe, in theory, people should come, and it's always flocked to people just needing the coffee after hiking for 5 hours.
I mean, that would definitely be me. I mean, I'd be hiking the mountain and being like, I can't do this. And like, someone would be like, but there's going to be coffee.
Yeah.
So,
and it's going to be cold up there and a nice cup of coffee, espresso. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, instant coffee. I feel very badly for how many people basically only ever drink instant coffee in the world.
Yeah, I grew up on that. Yeah. Grim stuff.
I didn't really have instant, but I did have a lot of like gas station coffee and just truly terrible non-instant, but equally terrible.
Yeah, equally terrible, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, what about some coffee farms? Have you visited much of those around the world?
Yeah, so I've been to them in a number of countries. It's, I would say, easier than it sounds to get to, perhaps. I mean, it helps a lot if you're, already in the coffee belt, which is basically the sort of middle of the world, where I believe I can get to the exact measurements, but it's 25 degrees north and 30 degrees south. So it's like even within the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, like it's narrower than that. And it's really the only part of that's a huge portion of the world in some ways, but it's the only part where coffee beans will grow there. So, if you're not in that area, you just cannot be part of it. And they grow best at quite a bit high altitude generally as well. So a lot of the best coffees, really come from the mountains of Colombia or mountains in places like Costa Rica. And the same thing is true in Asia and in Africa. And yeah, the first time I did it, it was almost a bit of an accident, where it was just sort of, I was doing, I don't know, let's call it traditional tourism, generic tourism in Costa Rica and Panama with a friend. And it was like one of the offered tours. And I thought, oh, well, that's great. Like, that sounds amazing. I didn't know. And then once I'd sort of done it once, I was like, oh, okay. So clearly this is something, it's not developed like wine tourism, but it's something that you can seek out. And there's obviously some established parameters around it. And then, so that really made me start seeking out, trying to go to places where they grow coffee, as well as if I was in those parts of the world, to go to coffee farms, to really try to put that into my itinerary as much as possible. And so I've been in Hawaii, which is like the only part of the US that you can grow coffee. I've seen some in Mexico, in Vietnam, I said in Costa Rica, but most extensively in Colombia, where there's really, which is a huge coffee growing country. I mean, they really it's essential to their economy. And there's if you're already in Colombia, which I spent last winter, quite a while in Colombia, it's very easy to travel domestically. If you have some spending money, the domestic flights are much cheaper than here. They're like public trains, or not a great example. Sorry if you don't live in New York. They're whatever. These are like $15 flights. To go, places, and it's relatively popular. The coffee triangle in Colombia is a beautiful place in the mountains with a lot of other agriculture as well. And there is a lot of domestic tourism in Colombia. And it's one of the places that wealthy people from Bogota and Medellin are particularly likely to go. It's quite close. Those flights are very short. The driving takes a very long time because you have to go up and down extraordinarily tall mountains. I mean, keep in mind, we were talking about altitude. Bogota is over like 2,500 meters high.
Okay, wow.
And some of these mountains and stuff are equally tall, or maybe slightly shorter, but anyway, very up and down, and the roads between cities are not amazing in Colombia. But then when you get to the coffee triangle in Colombia, not to be confused with the coffee belt, that's the part for the whole world. Coffee triangle is what they call it, and it's a few different Colombian states and cities, and it really is sort of a triangle shape. And there's extensive coffee growing, a lot of different sort of levels, if you will, some very large scale production, and also quite a few family small operations. And more recently, the realization that there is a desire for coffee tourism. It's still very small. Also, Colombia, where I very much recommend it as a destination in general for travel, outside of Medellin, and even in that scenario, outside of basically like 2 neighborhoods in Medellin, most people do not speak English. There is much less English than in a country like Mexico, for example, which has a much more established U.S. tourist trade. And just a much more established back and forth of population between the U.S. and Mexico. And so take a friend. If you don't speak Spanish, learn Spanish. First of all, what are you doing?
Spanish. Yeah.
But if you don't, and you don't have time in the next, before you go on your trip to learn it, I would really recommend going with somebody who speaks Spanish, because while Colombian people are very friendly and welcoming, and I think particularly happy to show you the sort of rebirth of Colombia. They can't just learn English at the drop of a hat either.
It's going to take a while.
So right. Yes. Sorry, that's all to say, you can really experience the coffee farms, especially some of them have more sort of formalized tour setup, but a lot of them will just, the owner of the coffee farm or maybe one of their children will take you on the tour. And most of the ones I went on, it was just me and the friend that I was with. Maybe sometimes there was 1 or 2 other people on the tour. These are not some large scale, polished items. They're really taking you around their farm and showing you their processes, some of the plants they grow sort of like in conjunction with the coffee to enliven the soil, to protect against pests in the area. They try to do some what we would call integrated pest management, if you're familiar with that, where you had to naturally fight off pests, as well as, depending on the farm, some chemical treatments. And you can, a lot of the year when they're not in harvesting, very few people work on the farms, and then they kind of do the huge coffee harvest time of years. If you think historically when farms need the most amount of labor. And those are usually people who come and they maybe will just work during those periods and pick other fruits or other items during other times of the year. Yes.
And also, do you get to learn the whole process from the start to maybe when they have to ship out the beans?
Yes, you really get to see a lot of times the baby trees that they have, the seedlings, which they're either growing sort of in a greenhouse or in some sort of protected enclosure, right? Because almost any other plant, the coffee trees, they're not all going to be successful. And the most
Hey, yeah, just a quick one. I just want to say there are many ways to support this podcast. You can buy me a coffee and help support the podcast with $5. Or you can go to my merch store with the affiliate link with TeePublic, where there's plenty of merch available to buy, such as t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, and also some children's clothing. Thirdly, which is free, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods. Also, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Simply just search for Winging It Travel Podcast, and you'll find me displaying all my social media content for traveling, podcast, and other stuff. Thank you.
Trying to think of a way to say death, but like the most precarious part of their stages is when they're small. So they kind of, you keep the littler ones together, and then usually when maybe they're around 2 years old, you would plant them into the ground or into the area amongst where the other coffee trees are. Depends on whether the details, obviously, of your farm. Maybe you put them in new soil areas, or maybe you put them just where you've taken out old trees. And you really do, you get to see the whole process and kind of experience with them. These are the baby plants, these are the medium age plants that are just starting to have berries that you can really pick. And here's the ones at like the height of their age, of their production value. And usually they'll let you, I mean, again, it depends on the time of year, but pick some of the beans, even in not in the, there's these some fruit produced a lot of the year, so not enough to necessarily harvest, but enough for you to see it. Other times of year you might be there's these gorgeous white flowers on the coffee trees. Make a really interesting display. And then the coffee beans themselves grow inside what are like it's a berry, basically. It's a fruit on the outside, and it's like a pulped skin, and they're red when you pick them, and the outside is sweet. You can eat the outside. I've had it a few times, and it's quite tasty and like soft, kind of like a tiny plum almost. And then not quite as sweet as that, but a similar texture and I think like a level of flavor. And then in some coffee regions, people, when they dry, depending on how they remove the skins, you can dry that and make a tea called Koskara out of it.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Huh.
Nice. It's not something, I mean, I do think it's something you could probably find here, but I don't think it's something that's usually exported, except probably in very specialty items. It's not, it's an interesting experience you have though, if you go to one of these regions. I would recommend trying it. And then you really see, so, right, they grow the coffee and then they harvest the coffee, obviously. And then there's a few different methods for removing the skins as well as drying the coffee, because basically almost all coffee, the vast majority of it is exported from wherever it's grown. And in order to do that, it needs to be dried, needs to lose some of its water concentration. And then that end result, however you get there, and there are various methods to get there that different farms will use depending on their style, depending on the part of the world you're in. That's then considered like a green bean. The green beans are and they are sort of green colored usually. That's what's exported, and what, say, like a Canadian coffee roaster would actually be importing are those green beans. And so all those steps along the way have done enormous amounts to impact the flavor, but the coffee roasting on the end also has a lot of impact. And a lot of times these smaller roasters, especially like the higher end ones in Colombia, most of the coffee, again, anywhere that you go where there's coffee grown, is going to be exported, like the vast percentage of it. But in some countries, and Colombia is one where people do consume quite a bit of coffee, some of it is kept around and to be sold in the domestic market. And then they do have some small coffee roasters, or even a lot of times the coffee farms will just have these like miniature coffee roasters on their own farm
nice.
So they can test out the product to see how it's going, and also to serve if they have people coming through, or to sell. Some of them, like especially, they're really maybe just selling to specialty stores in their own region, or restaurants, things like high-end restaurants, not doing any sort of large scale production. the large scale production in Colombia is Juan Valdez.
Okay.
Is the name of it. And but
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, and that's some of the best coffee I've ever had is this like freshly roasted on the coffee farm coffee in Colombia. And there's nothing quite like the experience of like drinking coffee next to a coffee field, you know, with a coffee farmer. Or just yeah.
I was going to
Now I
say,
wish
like
I was doing that right now.
yeah, tell me about it.
No offense.
The best thing has got to be if they can roast it and you taste it there. Well, there's no manipulation. They've made the bean, they've roasted it themselves. That is about as authentic as it gets. Because I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I'm glad you made the point that when you get to the end of the process at these farms, it's a green bean, not the beans that you see in Walmart, because they've already been roasted.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, "Oh, I want to buy the coffee from the farm, like original farm," great, but just beware, it might not be roasted. It probably isn't going to be roasted. It's going to be a green bean, and you're going to have to roast it yourself, which is another, I guess, process. And it's like that's not an easy process to get hold of. So I think I'm glad you made a point, but I'm also glad you can go there and taste it because that's awesome.
Absolutely. And I do think that like almost anywhere there'll be some amount of, again, these are miniature roasters that I've seen when you go to the coffee farms. These are not the large scale roasters you're going to see. Like if you go into a coffee roaster in the US or Canada, those probably cost $25,000.
Yeah.
And coffee farmers cannot afford that. And also they would have to be like shipped in from abroad.
Yeah.
So if they have one, they're often old style ones or just literally miniature, kind of like a desktop one, almost the size maybe of your maybe a bit bigger than a toaster, but again, much smaller than what you would see if you went into I don't know, name a local coffee roaster. But you know, where they're doing it in the back of the shop or something. But yeah, no, it's an amazing experience. And, you know, most of them are, farming is very obviously human intensive. And so there's still a lot of like touching, if you will, or they're very hands-on with the beans at that process. And a lot of them are very proud of it. And there's a lot of different workers' rights issues, and coffee is like really a colonial product in a lot of ways. I mean, coffee is native to Africa, and the vast majority of its growth is in Latin America and in Asia, and it was brought to both of those places in different eras, often by colonizers. I mean, literally by the like ruling colonial powers. So there's maybe
support like the smaller ones based on that. Like if you're going to go to see some coffee farms, don't go to the Starbucks one or whatever. Go and see like the smaller farms. You probably need like you to go and do a tour and contribute towards the process.
Yeah, and it's very helpful for them to have like a second stream of income.
Yes,
a lot of them are not. It's not the most lucrative business to be in. I mean, farming in general, but especially commodity crops, and it's very difficult to compete. There's a lot of pressure to sell your product to large scale operators. Obviously, it's sort of like the easier thing to do. And, as much as there's, these small independent coffee roasters and, coming over those places and saying like, oh, we want to develop relationships and we would like these high quality items, in pounds, they're not buying that much compared to any large company. I mean, it's just when you think about the sort of volume a small company produces versus the large ones. Yes. And sorry, just to go back to something you said earlier, you generally don't want to ship, at least not very long distances, roasted beans. You want to have it as fresh as possible.
Yeah.
So if you do get, actually like farm fresh coffee will probably means, because you can buy that. Like,
you can.
There are stores importers or stores that will sell that to you. Green beans, and you can try to, buy some, have some fun with it, roast it on the stove. There's some YouTube videos you can watch on how to do it. I've done a little bit of it, not on the stove. I don't think I've ever tried that, but I've done like a little in the mini roasters and stuff, and it's a fun experience. It's a lot harder than it looks.
It is,
and even I took a roasting course in Malaysia, at like one of the schools that does the certifications. And that, that was also really interesting experience. If you're super geeking into coffee, that's like a intense experience, but it gives you such perspective on how tricky it is to kind of constantly get it right. And coffee is like a natural product. So even the same beans from the same place they're not going to turn out the same. And so your results are going to be different. And you're just going to constantly having to check how it's going. Which is,
I think that's the same for most things, right? Like McDonald's, for example, they get their potatoes from the same farm, right, in Idaho. So if they got the same, even the same potato, drove through there, very interesting. But yeah, if they got their russet potato from, I don't know, Kansas, it's probably going to taste different to Idaho. So they have to get the same place, same potato to taste the same. I guess it's the same with coffee, right? Starbucks won't change because they've got their fixed coffee bean that they like, how they roast it and how they sell it. They're not going to change it.
Absolutely. And if you think about, if you go to even at the grocery store, if you buy 6 bananas or a bag of apples, even if they're the same kind, which the bananas are guaranteed to be the same kind, but apples are sort of something that there's quite a bit of variety among. But even if it's the same varietal, every one is going to be slightly different.
Yeah.
And coffee beans are a natural product. And so therefore, on some level, each one is a little bit different than the others.
And I think that's
in
great.
The same family, come off the same place, which is it makes it one of the things that makes it interesting, right? Like blueberries, that's another good example of, right, they're all the same, but in a little thing of blueberries, they're all actually a little different. And so all of the effort along the way to bring you that one cup of coffee.
I just love variety. There's nothing wrong with that. What's my next question for coffee? Oh yeah, can you volunteer there to work? Did you get any vibes of that, or do you know of any particular companies that offer that sort of thing?
I don't know of anyone where you can like volunteer. It's possible that like through the organization Wolf, or something like that, Wolf, you possibly could. But no, I wouldn't say. I mean, you definitely can have the like go and pick the coffee beans yourself and sort of try to go through that process. And they're definitely like when you're there, they'll show you how a lot of the processes work. I wouldn't say that they really have it because I haven't seen it where they want like people to come in and kind of disrupt the labor situation.
Fair.
But perhaps if you just wanted to do it for one day, or although again, it is like something of a skill to know which ones to pick. So you might be, though I think people, if you go in any coffee region and you talk to farmers, like somebody will probably let you come apprentice a bit with them if you wanted to, just try to go and see what happens.
I reckon like if you went to Colombia, for example, you should just go and do what you've done in Malaysia. Just go to do like, there must be available, right? You can go and do a little course on coffee roasting, for example. You can even do like a little barista course if you've never done that before. And at least like learn the process in the country that produces the bean, because then you might be working with the bean from the country. So it's as close as you're going to get, I'd imagine. If you try to do that, that'd be quite cool to get that experience.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. And I do think like really going to the farms and seeing the like post-harvest process is also very interesting, with the different drying methods and the skin removal and all of that. And, I don't know, maybe, who's to say, maybe they would let you volunteer. I didn't sort of ask about it in those terms.
Yeah. And I reckon if you're a new cafe owner looking to maybe get a specialized coffee bean, you'd make the trip to like somewhere in the coffee belt, right, to see what coffee you think you'd want to have in your cafe shop, right? There must be loads of options.
I mean, if you're really like going to start importing coffee and roasting it, yes. I think that's probably a little down the line from being like a coffee shop owner, where you probably would maybe start out with somebody else's, or with like because something is that you can do, like if you want to do some coffee roasting, again, this is like more more seriously, but like a small scale commercially, is places will like let you rent time on their machines, right? Most coffee roasting machines are expensive, and so in some places domestically and certainly internationally, there'll be like kind of communal ones that people can rent time on. Like the place that I took that course in Malaysia, other coffee shops or coffee roasters come and do their, they rent time on those machines because they're basically priced for like the US and European market, and that's very high. I mean, Malaysia is a relatively wealthy country, but those are still very large ticket items, and even domestically, those are still huge purchases.
Okay.
But
I reckon if people are interested in coffee and tourism, from my perspective, go to a country that does it, as in like they produce it. So maybe Colombia is a great example. Go and drink at some independent coffee shops in Medellin or Bogota or whatever, and then make a trip out of it and go and see the process itself at a farm. That's a great collective coffee experience if you're interested or into it, and you can buy and travel at the same time. It doesn't get better than that, I don't think.
Absolutely. And I mean, people in Colombia are very dedicated to coffee. There's a lot of art and murals depicting coffee workers and the coffee farmers. And there's actually a coffee themed amusement park in Colombia, Parque del Cafe.
Are you sitting like a cup and then they're spinning you around and stuff like that?
It's more like you're on a roller coaster and they've planted a coffee field around you, so the roller coaster's like going through the coffee.
Right. Okay.
Or like the log flume ride is like the theme of a coffee cup. And then there's like exhibits about coffee farming and the history of coffee, and in that look, I mean, it's literally called Parque del Cafe. Like it's a coffee themed amusement park. Like it's
you don't need Spanish for that.
They're not like light with it's not a light with the theming situation. I mean, it is also just like the main amusement park, and then sort of like that again, somewhat domestically touristy, agricultural, gorgeous mountain region of Colombia. Because also all these like gorgeous, I said mountain areas. They're beautiful to see as well, right? Coffee growing, talking about things growing on the side of hills and at high altitude. And even in Hawaii, where it's like lower altitude, I mean, then you're just in Hawaii and everything's beautiful and it's on the side of slopes overlooking the ocean. So that's great. No, I think it's a great idea, and I would definitely recommend if you are like even moderately excited by coffee, when you're going to be doing some international travel opportunities, that like I do think if you can pick one of these parts of the world to aim for, and if you just happen to be in one, it's definitely something that could be a fun, 1 to 3 day element of your tour, is to go to see the coffee of it all.
Yep, that's on my list. I haven't done it.
You won't look at the cup the same way, and then you can just like sneak back in with 7 kilos of coffee.
Oh yeah, as long as it's not something else.
No. And don't ask Colombians about drugs. Also,
you don't get in trouble with that.
They don't like it. Also, no. So don't do that.
I think they've had enough of their troubles with that. I think they've been through it.
So
okay, we're gonna finish the episode for a company that you work for called, well, not company, not for profit, Not Just Tourists. What do you do? And I've already obviously read what you do, but it sounds amazing. Can you explain to listeners how important your work is?
Sure. We are a nonprofit that provides travelers who are going abroad to impoverished countries with free suitcases full of medical supplies to take with them. So again, if you were going in this scenario to Colombia, you can fit it all right in with your coffee tourism. Look at that. And you would be
smooth.
We give people suitcases when they're going, and it's really, again, based on your travels already that you are going to go to. Give people suitcases full of free medical supplies. Those medical supplies, as well as actually the suitcases themselves, are donated to our organization. The vast majority of them are things that would otherwise be thrown away. There's not medical waste. It's perfectly fine, perfectly usable items. There's just a lot of waste in our system, like we're talking about with the coffee cups, where we just love to throw things away in this country. And it's a really great opportunity to give back when you're traveling, to take things to underserved clinics, as well as to create a connection with somebody on the ground where you're visiting, someone who lives there, who's servicing the community. And it's a really unique travel experience on top of giving back. It's something a lot of people do as just like, a few hours one day on their trip somewhere. So let's say you're going to Cancun, Mexico, for example, Cancun is a vibrant place with a lot going on, but there's a whole other side to the tourism industry where there's a lot of impoverished people living in the area, who could really use the support. We give supplies to people going, I don't want to say all over the world, but certainly to many different parts of the world, where there's underserved medical needs in them. It's originally a Canadian-based organization. The largest chapter is out of Toronto. It's been operating for over 30 years. We are new in New York City, but we're excited. And yeah.
How can people get involved to help volunteer?
Sure. If you're interested in taking a suitcase, well, you can get a lot more information in general on our website, njt.net, which has tons more information about what we do, where our supplies come from, the millions of pounds of usable supplies that we kind of rescue every year and put to good use, as well as the kinds of places that we send them to. If you're interested in volunteering in a city in which you live, there'll be ways to reach out to the chapters there. Again, we're not a huge organization, but we do have chapters across the US and Canada, as well as one in London, England. And so, yeah, if you're in California or New York, Toronto, I'm not going to name all the chapters, but there's a medley across North America that you can get involved with, that you can take suitcases from. You don't have to volunteer in order to take a suitcase. You just have to volunteer to, pick it up and take it to the clinic where you're going. But if you're not traveling internationally and you're interested in helping out, we're always looking for people to, help find more supplies, to pack suitcases, to help coordinate travel. There's always things to be done. So lots of great excitement.
Lots of different types of volunteering. You can help like on the ground locally. You can obviously take a suitcase abroad. I guess people might, if they're interested in working for you, I guess you might have some roles as well in different offices. So I guess they can all access that on the website. And do you have social media as well, I think?
So we do Not Just Tourists is like pretty heavily in terms of our social media is on Facebook. You can look up Not Just Tourists, the general organization. You can also look up the local chapters, say Not Just Tourists OC, or Not Just Tourists Toronto, Not Just Tourists Boulder. Just to name a different chapter for a change. We're a volunteer-run organization, so it is entirely volunteer. And I do have a different sort of day job, if you will.
Oh, do you? Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Like we do this. I mean, it's a big part of what I do, but it's not everything that I do. And there's, again, there's volunteering on the ground, there's taking bags. But if you think you might be interested in the organization, there's obviously always work to be done, like from a laptop almost anywhere, reaching out to people and helping us improve our online presence, improve the communications that we have both with our travelers and with medical clinics.
Okay, so I'll put all the links to the website and the social medias in the description notes so people can click on those. And I'll whack it in the title of the podcast episode name so people can just see it, I guess, forever. Thanks for sharing that. It's very important work, and I think it's obviously needed because it's one of those things that are constantly revolving door. Like you just need medical supplies all the time.
Absolutely. And there's so much, particularly like disposable items like bandages and syringes and masks and gloves that you just need constantly more and more of those. And they're items I think we really take for granted. It's something I very much grew up taking for granted, that there was always going to be more of something you could buy in a store, or that would just be around. I mean, I think about sometimes in my daily work, I go to construction sites and there's just, lots of first aid kits. And of course there should be, I'm always saying there shouldn't be, but it's just the kind of thing that you it's very easy to take for granted. Like the swabs that you get that clean before you get a shot, or the amount of, just kind of those items that once they're used, then they really can't or definitely shouldn't be used again. Bandages. Unfortunately not as widely available to everybody in the world. And, we're really just trying to do some part of aiding with that, as well as attacking sort of waste on this side. And again, connecting people who are traveling with locals where they're going. This was something when I came across it, I thought it really addressed a lot of things that interested me, sort of like giving back while traveling and also giving back to the travel community itself.
Yeah, great work. Yeah, thanks for what you do. I think a lot of people around the world say thank you for what you do, because I think that it just shouldn't be a thing that people don't have access to stuff, but it's just a reality, I'm afraid.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're going to finish the episode on some quickfire travel questions. Last little feature. You've been about the world, so it's good. Going to fire out some favorites of your travels over the years. And I'm actually going to start with...
It's travel question time.
3 favorite countries that you traveled to previously.
Well, we've been talking about it a lot already, but I really enjoy Colombia.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it's kind of an obvious choices, I think, unfortunately, but Thailand and Mexico, places that I just really keep going back to. So I think particularly Mexico, it's a very large country. There's a lot of different things to see. There's beaches, but there's not just beaches. There's mountains and there's cities and amazing food and just so much different things going on.
Yeah. Okay. What about 3 countries you've not traveled to that maybe next that you want to go to?
Yeah, I'd really like to go to Turkey. I think you mentioned it earlier, and it's also just somewhere that's very much really in my eye to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Some other ones, Morocco, hoping to go at the end of the year. And I don't think I'm going there anytime soon, but Georgia, the country of Georgia, is somewhere I've wanted to go to for a while or recently. But...
Okay. What about 3 favorite cuisines on your travels?
Korean food.
Yeah.
Mexican food.
Yeah.
And it's not one kind of food, but the food in Malaysia. So it's actually a varieties of food, but that are very common there because it is a diverse country.
Yeah.
And not to say the other ones aren't, but the history is a bit different in Malaysia. And I just, really epic food experiences.
Okay. If you could drink a coffee in any city in the world and watch the world go by, where are you going to sit?
I'm going to sit in New York. Honestly.
Fair. Okay.
I know I live here, but I choose to live here. I think it's an amazing place, and there's just so much happening, and I just really think, I do it quite often, just kind of, go places and sit for a few minutes and enjoy coffee and watch life unfold.
Okay, what about, this is going to be an interesting question, which country has the best coffee? Or, okay, you have top 3 in no order that you would love to have a coffee in, as in their coffee is the best.
Well, I haven't been, but Australia is supposed to have really amazing coffee.
It is.
So I would really like to experience that at some point and try a lot of different ones. I think that there's some truly great coffee in a lot of places in the United States. I'd be remiss to not say that. I think, Colombia obviously has some great coffee. Now I'm just giving all the options, because I do also think that it's there's really interesting experiences to be had still in Italy with coffee. And I had some great coffee in Japan as well. I don't think it's sort of necessarily where people first think of, but it's
so much
exciting
choice.
Coffee to be had around the world.
Yeah. Okay. What about a favorite beach that you've been to?
Bocas del Toro in Panama, which is an island chain on the Atlantic Caribbean side of Panama. Just epically clear water and really interesting coral. Really beautiful beaches and lots of wildlife and
Okay, if you could pick one country in the world to live in for a year, where are you going to live?
I'm probably going to live, when I heard you ask this before, it was that you haven't lived before, so I had to eliminate a few, but I'm probably going to pick to live in Bangkok. Thailand.
Dream.
I would love to somehow figure out a way to make that work, but it's logistically hard for me, just work-wise, but someday maybe.
Okay, next question is, if there's one view you can only look at for the rest of time, what view is that going to be?
Oh, wow. The thing that first comes to mind is some of the views in around Seattle and Washington State, with the big mountains and the evergreen trees, as well as water. I love a lot of water, obviously. So that's really when I just think about epic views but you turn the corner and your jaw drops. That's
Okay.
really one of my favorites.
Do you have a favorite mountain?
I do not have a favorite mountain. I've never thought about a favorite mountain.
No mountains.
I mean, not like one mountain. I mean, like I think like the mountain. I mean, Mount Rainier is very interesting to look at. You can see it from a lot of places.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like some of the mountain ranges in Colorado that I've seen are really,
the Rockies.
Yeah. But also you kind of see them from different places. But I wouldn't say there's like one mountain where I'm like, this is my mountain. I've just honestly never thought about it before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And what about a favorite high adrenaline activity on your travels that you've done?
Does terrifying plane rides count?
Yeah.
I did indoor skydiving for the first time earlier this year. That was really cool.
Yeah.
It's like a fun sort of actually, I guess relatively low risk way to go if you're into adrenaline. I do love zip lining though, and that's I think a really great one if you are like me, clumsy. It's relatively and like fall down things a lot. It's kind of hard to fall down. Your zip lining is actually basically impossible, as opposed to just like flights of stairs, or if you're like climbing a mountain, or just of like a not that intense of a mountain. I've fallen down a lot of things in my life. Drop things a lot. But zip lining, I mean, there's just so many great places to do zip lining, and you can really often just get these crazy views that
unique, isn't it?
I think it's a really unique way to like see things from above, and like, where I don't know how they've done this, where they run the lines across some of these like crazy gulfs.
Don't want to know.
Yeah. But and I think it's something that, that's really on offer in a lot of different places.
Okay. Penultimate question is a country or a place within a country that you didn't like when you traveled there.
There's like a very obvious answer for me, especially recently, which is Bali.
Yeah.
And I feel badly because Balinese people are very friendly and very nice. And perhaps the problem is that they've been like too welcoming to tourists over the years, because people treat it like very badly. And it's a little hard to see. And there was just and again, this is like in no way the locals' fault, but the pollution, like the localized pollution, especially in the ocean and on the beaches, is terrible. And like the trash that washes up and goes back and everything is like really upsetting is the word. And the traffic is terrible, and in a lot, especially in town. But it's not just like, I didn't just go to Canggu, like I think it's in a lot of Bali, and at least it's unfortunate, and it's beautiful in many ways, but it is I think it could use a break,
a reset
from all the foreigners. Yes.
Yeah, I think,
and also to be fair, just like it is also like the trash in the ocean is from that region as well. It's definitely certainly not just from the state of Bali. It's all around. And when I've been like in the waters nearby, I mean, you're like with the guides and they're pulling plastic bags like trash and like containers and stuff like out of the water while you're snorkeling or scuba diving. I mean, and it's so common for them that they like bring something in order to put the trash in it, so that they can at least have like some things where they're like, I mean, it's not going to clean the ocean, but they're at least contributing to sort of the improvement of it.
I think it's a weird place. I think there's so many expats and digital nomads there now that you just cringe when you're like, oh yeah, I live abroad in Asia now. Oh yeah, where do you live? Oh, it's Bali. Oh, you're one of those. Like, I just think they're just taking the piss a little bit. And don't say you're living there because it's like paradise. You're living there to save tax probably, or just not pay any tax. So I just think it's a weird vibe there, and it's definitely not the Balinese. The Balinese are totally nice, and I implore anyone who goes there to properly speak with Balinese and not just be a digital nomad or just a tourist who rent a driver for a day. Like, I think it's a weird environment, and I think you're right, it needs a reset.
And I would say if you do go, like, try to use as many of the actual local sort of services and items as possible. And because there's it's hard.
Another conversation now, I think.
That's
Let's finish on an up note.
Interesting question.
Yeah, the last question is going to be, if someone's listening right now and they want to go traveling, but they're not sure or they're scared, what are you going to say to encourage them to go?
Whatever you think foreign travel is going to be like, you're wrong. I'm wrong. We're all wrong. Everywhere I go, I see unexpected things. Every time I go back to places I've already been or to a new place I've never been, like you see new things, and it really allows you to learn about other places, but also gives you insight on your home country and yourself. And I think the takeaways can be really wonderful and mind expanding.
Done. Okay, Rebecca, thanks for coming on to the podcast. It's been a great chat. Talked a lot about coffee, which is one of my little pastime favorites, little passion of mine, but don't talk much about it on the podcast because it's a travel podcast, but we've delved into some important subjects. Loved it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. This was fun.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to my Winging It Travel podcast episode today. You can find me on Instagram at James Hammond Travel or Winging It Travel Podcast. You can search for both. I release weekly clips of this podcast episode, as well as photos from the last 8 to 10 years of my travels. You can also follow me on TikTok, Facebook and Pinterest by searching Winging It Travel Podcast. I do release daily content to do with travel and the podcast throughout the week. Also check out my website, jameshammond.org. There's content about myself, my travels, and there's also a newsletter sign up as well as a contact form. Finally, please rate and review the podcast on Podchaser. This is my platform of choice. Alternatively, you can rate this on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. This really helps the podcast gain a bit of traction for the future in terms of guests and content. And I'm glad to see that you guys are listening out there, reviewing it and enjoying the content so far. Stay safe, stay humble, keep listening, keep traveling, and I'll catch you soon. Cheers, James.